Good evening, everyone. Good evening. We're back again. It is a wonderful Wednesday evening. I certainly hope it is. It might be. Oh, man, we have had a long, fun day. Um... oh, anyway, so fun stuff. I apparently can't write script to save my life. Um, you know, because logic and stuff. Anyway, we have an important discussion tonight. And it's one that does not have a clear factual answer. And I think that's going to be something that is going to become very apparent here, or very early on. And we have to kind of take that for what it is to start. So that's the first thing on here, is that what we're talking about here does not have a right answer per se. There is no technical bounds or legal bounds by which we can abide in order to make sure that to make sure that we're kind of following a strict path on here. So what we're talking about tonight is criticism, and I don't mean just in general in the a metaphysical concept of criticism. I mean actually official professional criticism, like whenever someone does a review. And while this is mostly going to be centered around most particularly games, because that's what I tend to focus around is games, some of the things we discuss here can apply more broadly. So the most particular thing that we're going to talk about first, and that's to kind of understand what criticism is. And, oh, nice. I didn't actually set up my thing on here. Woohoo! Alright, so, criticism. Criticism is the practice of judging the merits and faults of something. I don't think you can really get more clear than that. So there is a definition, and this is an official accepted by the book definition of criticism, is focusing on the negative of something. If you're seen as being critical of something, you're seen as only focusing on the negative. However, professional criticism, as is the actual definition of it, is actually just judging the merits of something. It is not focusing just on the negative. It is focusing on negative, positive. You're kind of breaking down the nitty-gritty of whatever it is you're judging, and you are performing an analysis of it in a way that you can relay it to others, or at least hopefully so. Not all. I mean, I guess you could say criticism doesn't have to be that way, but a professional critic is expected to be able to relay their analysis in a digestible way to others, because that's what they do for a living. They criticize something and relay those thoughts to someone else. We're moving our mic down here a little bit so that way we can get that nice close-in voice. So in any case, that's criticism as a whole. And now, this is just a kind of a base kind of description of how criticism works. And to summarize a lot of it, professional criticism is a necessary component in a healthy, just in general, a healthy existence. All right. So if I do something, I need to receive feedback on what I am doing. And this, if we take this as broad as possible, right? We really stretch this out to be the most abstract form of feedback as possible. When I step on the ground, there's very subtle variations in maybe the way the ground is tilting and so on. And my feet detect those minor variations, and without me even knowing it, my brain is making adjustments in order for me to not stumble and fall while I'm walking. At least hopefully. I mean, let's be honest, that doesn't always work that way. After all, walking is just a series of calculated falls. The point is here is that is a kind of a form of force feedback. Your feet are detecting variations in the ground below you. They're detecting that feedback from the ground and making adjustments accordingly so that you don't stumble and fall. In a similar way, consumer feedback is a way for which a business can get necessary insights into how their product is doing. Ideally, a business makes a product of some kind. They sell that product. The consumer gives them feedback, right? And then they can say, well, this worked well, this didn't work so well, and they can make their adjustments accordingly so that they're making the most amount of money they possibly can, and the consumers are getting the best possible product they can, right? There's various factors that can be criticized. It's not necessarily that you can only criticize one specific facet of something. You can criticize everything from the price to the content to the manner in which it's delivered. You know, it's pretty broad on there. Where a professional critic comes in is a professional critic is a person assumed to be of a fair mind. Fuck that objective bullshit. There is no such thing as an objective critic. Anybody who tells you that is lying, right? The whole point of criticism is to be subjective, is to give your criticism. However, you should be fair. There's a difference between being subjective or being objective and being fair. Objective means that you have no personal biases on anything. Fair is someone who recognizes their biases and can properly articulate their thoughts around them and disclose them properly. You have to really know yourself to be a good critic, and that's my opinion on there. See, I'm being fair in my criticism of a critic. I think that might be going a little bit meta too early here, but let's bring it back a step. You should try to be fair-minded on it, and that's kind of the first type. But what a professional critic really is doing is they are designed to be an ever-present source from which a business can get feedback. They are also an ever-present source from which consumers can get feedback on a product before they decide to purchase. And that's a key point on here, is consumerism, right? So consumers, they want to purchase stuff, right? Well, money is a finite resource for at least most of us. I mean, I'm sure some people have no financial worries, but I don't have all the money in the world to just dump on everything I find, and I assume that most other people don't as well. So what a critic allows us to do is get feedback on a product so we can make our own decisions on whether we're going to buy that product. And that's something else that a critic has to do. They have to evaluate something, acknowledging their own biases of that particular something that they might have, but still find a way to articulate an analysis of that product that is not unduly influenced by those biases, right? Unduly, it's going to be affected. You can't avoid it entirely, but you can try to keep it as much out of the muck as possible, essentially. And that's kind of the heart of it, right? This is extremely important for a healthy consumer marketplace, because then consumers can actually get a sense of what the product is before they buy, and businesses get someone who is fair-minded judging their product, and they can get a very unambiguous analysis of what they are doing or not doing correctly. That should be the way things work. That's kind of your utopian society, if you will, from the consumer standpoint. Unfortunately, it does not always work quite that way, and that's kind of what we're going to get into. But first, let's take a step moment here, and let's discuss consumer advocacy. Okay, this is a major point of what I do. A lot of what I'm doing here is consumer advocacy. In order for me, I'm not a critic or a review per se of any products. You're not seeing me on here reviewing games, for example. However, what I do is I do educate you on the market and what certain things are that you might hear, so you have a better understanding of the things you're hearing. So whenever you hear someone, for example, say, hey, this critic is doing something nasty, well, you can make some judgments about that critic, or you can make some judgments about the person making it. Let's throw in an example here, so you guys can kind of get an idea of what I'm talking about here. This is a post that was made to a Facebook group. We won't say where, we won't say who this was, anything of that sort. Nameless person here said and this was in reference to someone pointing out a fault of a game, right? And the fault was comical, it was intended to be humorous, whatever, right? This person responds as the sad part about this is that those who were offered payment to trash this excellent game now have trolls doing their work for no reward. So he essentially made an insinuation that critics of this game who said negative things were paid, were financially compensated in order to say bad things about the game. But they don't have to anymore because trolls are doing it for them now. That being what it is. Then when questioned about this, he went on to further say, EA has come under fire for not kowtowing to video game reviewers by providing free swag, advanced copies, and free access to merchandise. So it's easy offer perks to rabid inner circle fanboys to attempt to destroy their reputation by highlighting small bugs and inconsistencies within their games, despite largely high quality offerings they've provided. Sorry, that one's difficult to get through without laughing. Anyway, this is a function of what essentially amounts to extortion. So we have very colorful speech going on here. So first of all, whenever you have someone using deliberately inflammatory language like extortion, insinuating a crime, right? Extortion is a legal term, right? People use it informally, but extortion is actually when you are trying to force some kind of favors or money out of someone in exchange to keep quiet about something. It's a crime, right? So using language like extortion, and then rabid inner circle fanboys, right? We've got all this really, really inflammatory speech there. And so we can go a bunch of different routes, as is most of the case when we see things like this. We can go to my very well-used list of logical fallacies here. But we're going to focus on a couple of them, most particularly here. This one in particular is actually what's known as poisoning the well. And we're gonna go into that one very specifically here. Poisoning the well, or attempting to poison the well, is a type of informal logical fallacy where irrelevant adverse information about a target is preemptively presented to an audience with the intention of discrediting or ridiculing everything the target that person has to say. Poisoning the well can be a special case of argumentum ad hominem, which that's what it is. It was first used by so-and-so. Yeah. Point is that the idea here is that by insinuating that people that were negative about this game, oh, I'm sorry, you guys can't see that. People that were negative about this game were in some way monetarily compensated in order to say bad things. Furthermore, insinuating that those people were rabid, as in infected with a sickness that makes them unduly violent, and they're also extorting. They're criminals, right? So this is kind of where you gotta pull some things about. Whenever someone makes a very crazy claim about something, the first step you take is to actually digest the language that they're using and think, well, so you're saying a lot of these things, but I can obviously tell that you're using very inflammatory speech in order to try to rile people up and get people going. It's an internet troll. I mean, yeah, we see a lot of them on here. You'll notice that in this post, and this is the entirety of what they wrote, I am not in any way leaving anything out here. This is all that they wrote here, and I'm not editing this in any way or anything of the sort. There is no evidence whatsoever provided for the allegations made. These are just allegations someone's throwing out there without any sort of credible evidence, citing any examples, anything of the sort. They're just saying that people, reviewers, video game reviewers were angry and putting them under fire. To note, the game in which that they are assumingly referring to here is actually very much a game that was very poorly received because of specific mistakes that were made that were very well outlined and very well known. It had nothing to do with actual reviewers, and the claims in that of not reviewing advanced copies of games is not actually even true. I know for a fact that in this game that reviewers did receive advanced copies. I know this because, well, I know the people that got those advanced copies, and yes, they got them well in advance. Now, they had a review embargo to which they could not they could play the game as much as they could in that time frame, write their review, but they could not publish the review until a specific date. That's what a review embargo is. And that's an agreement they signed with the game publisher so that spoilers, assumingly, aren't released too soon. Let's be honest, a review embargo, truth be told, is just a way for publishers to try to mitigate any negative criticisms coming out too early before the game does. The idea is they want to try to keep criticism to a minimum so that people are as blind for as long as possible. That's the truth of it. You might get some minor spoilers if a review were to come out too early, but I doubt that's really the case. You can review without spoilers. Excuse me. So the thing is here is that whenever you see someone claim something like this about reviewers, it is deeply troubling because of the fact that reviewers already, as is, are on this kind of imaginary ethics cloud. There's no actual formal ethics to the actual review process or the critical process for it. It also makes it very troubling because of the fact that EA in particular very much kowtows to fanboys in the form of their Game Changers program, where they find people who have built a significant public audience on EA games, right? So people who watch content of people, of these influencers, they watch the content of these influencers who play EA games primarily, and then they invite them out to EA Studios where they get to do all kinds of cool shit. Mass Effect Andromeda, they got to help in kind of providing feedback, very, very isolated feedback on certain multiplayer elements. Battlefront, right? Battlefront, they got to experience some of the game before anybody else. They got to shoot a special advertisement and a promotional piece before the game is released. These game changers are what EA considers to be influencers. And why do they consider them that? Is because these people sell games. Not intentionally. They're not salespeople. What they do is they will play a game and people will see them playing that game and therefore want to buy that game. Not everybody, but a lot of people. These people are not critics. These people are just streamers or YouTube content creators or the like. All they do is they enjoy the game and people watch them enjoying the game in some manner or another. So whenever people who are not critics, who are just enjoying a game, which to be fair is its own form of criticism, right? When you have that, you get, and those people do not have any sort of expectations of being fair-minded. Now remember what I was saying before about being fair-minded, right? These people are not held to any standard of being fair-minded. They are there because they enjoy these games. Well, when you have a game that you enjoy and the person who makes that game invites you to an exclusive event where you and only other people like you are in attendance, and you all get to party, have a good old time, and even get some promotional material for your channel and content, you are going to be more than unduly biased towards saying good things about that game. I know this because I actually got to experience that firsthand in discussing criticisms of a certain game with one such game changer who had nothing but rave reviews to say about this game. Whenever I would point out a criticism of the game, he would deflect it and carefully say, I never noticed that. The terminology there was very careful, saying, I never noticed that, not that it doesn't exist. This was a person who was that was unduly biased and would not even admit to a legitimate criticism being present. And it was very unfortunate because that was probably the last time we actually had a full conversation. And I don't really talk to that person anymore because I don't like dishonesty. That's the frank truth of it. That aside, when you get comments, like I said, the concern of comments such as this is, first of all, you have influencers being given a leg up on this content, right? Then the second thing you have is that people trust critics less because they think that critics might be somehow trying to unduly bias them towards a game for some hidden motive or agenda, or motive, if I can talk, hidden motive or agenda, right? And that kind of brings us to our next piece on here. And this did not happen in this case, but I also see this frequently as well. Whenever a critic speaks up in criticism of a game, they're often faced with ergo decido, which is also known as the traitor's critic fallacy. And essentially what this is whenever someone criticizes something in a way that's oftentimes meant to be constructive, instead of someone engaging them in conversation, they usually are responded to with something along there, well, if you don't like it, then blank. Insert your dismissive statement here. Now, while the examples given here are actually pretty nice here. I think we need to work on improving the United States' taxation system. The current system suffers from multiple issues that have been resolved in other places such as Canada or Europe. The fallacious comment is, well, if you don't like it, why don't you leave and go somewhere you think is better? They're not addressing the person's criticism. They're just saying, well, if you're going to criticize it, just go away. Therefore, leave. That's what ergo decido means, is therefore leave. In the case of putting it into context of games criticism, if I say, I didn't like this game because I felt the writing was subpar for that studio. Yes, this is actually a criticism I made of Mass Effect Andromeda. I have received the feedback multiple times in saying that I thought the writing of Mass Effect Andromeda was subpar. I've received the ergo decido response of, well, if you don't like it, just go play another game. Stop preventing other people from enjoying the game. That is in essence the response you receive back from fanboys of it. So here's the thing, and this is really what this boils down to, is that whenever somebody kind of has that instinctive response to, instead of actually agreeing or disagreeing with your criticism, they don't have to agree. They can just say, I didn't have that problem. If their response is in some form or another to tell you that you should therefore go play something else, that usually means that they acknowledge that problem is, or they somewhere deep down know that problem is there, don't have a response that they can fairly say they disagree. but they don't want people to have that view. They feel invalidated by that criticism, and therefore they feel the need to unduly defend something that otherwise shouldn't be. The other one I frequently see, which falls in line, is still ergo decido, is a meme that I often see, which is where you have like it takes various contextual forms, but it's essentially like you have the PC gamer is sitting there shouting at console players who are just having fun playing games, and the PC gamer shouting at them, "Oh, consoles are so much worse than PC, and blah blah, and here's the reasons why PC's better than console," and the console players are just ignoring them, playing their game and having fun. The ergo decido is essentially that you are, if you have a criticism against console, you should just ignore console gamers, let them have their fun, right? Therefore, go play PC. If you think PC is so much better, just therefore go play PC. Don't say anything critical about consoles, right? And that is the problem with it, and the reason why I bring that up is because that line of thinking allows a corporation to get away with a lot of actions they otherwise would not have. For example, tying loot boxes, glorified gambling, to the progression in Battlefront 2 to the point where people revolted up against it. Those loot boxes are by no means new. They've been around since the first FIFA Ultimate Team. Granted, they weren't paid at the time. They've been around for many, many, many years now. But the fact that any criticism leveraged at that game was not loud enough to actually reach the consumer base, and was very likely drowned out by comments like this. You didn't hear a clear voice saying, "Hey, this is wrong." So, with that in mind, how do we handle ethics, right? And we've got a couple of different, at least somewhat poised responses from other facets, right? The first facet of there is not, and these are neither of which are from the games industry, because there really isn't any established rules for ethics in games journalism or games criticism, right? So we kind of have to operate in other fields of people criticizing in an ethical way, or most particularly criticizing in the art and entertainment industry, because video games are a form of art. I know that some people would disagree with that, but the fact of the matter is that there is a large component of video games that is creative. You can criticize the creative part and criticize the mechanical part, both in part together, and still have a criticism that is ethical. It's not unethical if we don't do it that way, but we'll get to that in a moment. The first part on there this is from a website, a genealogist website, which is obviously a form of science, and science does have very clear methods of criticism and peer review, but this is actually more along the lines of a little bit more informal forms of review and criticism on here. And their title on here, and I think this is great, being nice versus being right. And the reason for pointing this out is because oftentimes I will hear people claim that if you say something negative about something they enjoy, that you're just a hater, right? You're a hater. It's another pejorative that's just invented in order to dismiss your criticism. But that's where you kind of have the issue of, do you want to be seen as a nice person, or and therefore it more or less know that you're right but not say anything, or do you want to I guess be right? I don't think really being right is the correct term on there. I guess being honest would be better. Do you want to be nice, or do you want to be honest? Because here's the truth of it is that most people, they will actually be nice, before they're honest. We all know about those stories about the little white lies, that you tell people like, oh, do these pants make my butt look big? Oh, of course not, you look fine in those pants. These are things that culturally are acceptable, right? It is acceptable to be nice before it's acceptable to be honest. Being bluntly honest all of the time is actually considered pretty rude and not smiled upon in modern society. So that's something to keep in mind on here. Being a critic of a game and saying something adversarial about a game is actually considered probably rude in most cases, and therefore by being a critic, you yourself are making yourself kind of in a very awkward social spot, right? Most critics all know this, and they're for the most part, I would assume, are comfortable with it. Otherwise, you probably wouldn't get into being a professional critic, but it is what it is. So in this side on here, they said, in the context, the legal genealogist isn't talking about criticism in the sense of censure or fault finding, as I was meaning the deliberately finding negative stuff and focusing on negative. No, they're talking about in the broader sense, the act or art of analyzing and evaluating or judging the quality of work, and about being critical in a sense that we can all aspire to, involving skillful judgment as to truth, merit, etc. Let's say, for example, you're reading something in this blog and you happen to have knowledge and a background in the subject being discussed that leads you to believe that I am just plain wrong. It's not that I hold a different opinion than you it's not that I hold a different opinion that you might base on facts, whereas we both agree. I'm not talking about a case where we're dealing with the difference between Andrew Jackson was one of the least effective presidents and no, he wasn't. I'm talking about a case where I am just wrong. Where, say, I've reached an erroneous conclusion, or my work just isn't up to snuff, or simply doesn't meet genealogical standards. Now you, as the smarter than I am reader, have essentially two choices. You can ignore the error, stand silent, say nothing, or you can call me out on it, tell me that I'm wrong. Which, in this circumstance, is the ethical choice? To which the only possible answer, either one is. And this is something that we're going to keep coming back to on here. There is no ethical standard when it comes to a lot of informal criticism. There is no ethical imperative in genealogy or anywhere else for every reader of a blog or an article or a games reviewer to alert the author or game creator or the publisher to every error that makes it into print, online, or off. If you don't think a mistake is important enough for you to take the time to comment on it, then you can let it pass, and that will have been an ethical choice. There's also no ethical prohibition in genealogy or anywhere else against any reader of the same blog or article or game stating the disagreement with that blog or article or journal or game, even in strong terms. If you do think a mistake is important enough for you to take time to comment on it, then you can state your disagreement, and that will also have been an ethical choice. That is kind of something that we're also going to get into with in art, is that saying something or not saying something is both ethical. However, this is where we we draw an ethical separation. If I choose to criticize something, or I choose not to criticize something, those are both acceptable for me as the consumer, as the player, as the reader, whatever. I'm on the receiving end of the creative content, right? Where ethics, I think, comes into play is when I am saying something, but I'm being deliberately dishonest about that. For example, I have just gotten Casino Front 2, right? And it just launched with the loot boxes in full swing. And in it, I played the game and I say, well, these loot boxes are kind of unfair. But EA comes in and says, hey, so yeah, we heard you were going to say that the loot boxes are unfair, but we would really like it if you didn't. And therefore I said, you know what? I am going to still review this game, but I am not going to make any mention of those loot boxes. I'm going to leave all mention of star cards and loot boxes completely out of my review and just talk about the gameplay. Is that ethical? I would say no. That in that particular case, you are deliberately being dishonest about what you say, right? Even if you were okay with the loot boxes, deliberately omitting the fact of them being present, that is something that is factually false, right? You are omitting a significant part of the game there, a significant point. That would be dishonest. That would be intellectually dishonest, and that would be, in my opinion, unethical, right? However, if I were to say, play the game and say, I'm a really big fan of EA, and choose to abstain from reviewing altogether, that would be ethical. If I feel that I could not be, if I could not provide an accurate review of the game, for example, because maybe my bias is too strong towards what I'm reviewing, and I choose to abstain from reviewing a game, that's also very ethical, right? That's really what it comes down to. Is ethics is really most about intent, and that's where it's really hard to judge. Is intent and morals, and those things are very abstract metaphysical constructs, right? There's no clear case of them, and there's no clear way to define it. However, if we move on to kind of art criticism on there, art criticism is very, very specific, and it actually has a very, they actually have like two different forms of thought on it, which is very interesting, their take on it. Art criticism is probably one of the more clearly defined versions, similar to movie critics, although, like I said, I'm pretty certain art critics are even more insane with how in-depth they get into the process of it. So, in art, ethical criticism refers to the inclusion of an ethical component in the interpretation and evaluation of art. The two traditional opposing positions taken with respect to ethical criticism are autonomism and moralism. The former claims that ethical criticism is never legitimate since moral and aesthetic values are autonomous, while the latter reduces aesthetic value to moral value. The extreme versions of autonomism and moralism, their appeal and their flaws, are discussed in section 2. We'll kind of touch on that a little bit here. In recent years, the debate over ethical criticism has resurfaced, partially due to the Ethical Criticism Symposium, in which was discussed the final section of the article, since it bears on the consideration of the casual thesis that certain literature can have a positive moral effects on its audience. The second arm of the ethical criticism debate saw several more moderate and more plausible positions proposed. These more are moderate autonomism, moderate moralism, and ethicism. In the body of literature 2, the focus was on the narrative art. What is at issue in the current debate is whether the realm of aesthetic value should be taken to include the moral value of the narrative art. Never. Only sometimes when an artwork displays moral features, merits or defects, or whenever art displays moral features, merits or defects. So here's the thing. What this is talking about, and this, where this applies to video games in particular, art obviously is very... Video games are art, but this is talking about actual like painting and the like, or in the case of writing books and the like as well. Fiction specifically. well, I guess, or nonfiction, whatever. Point is that this is talking about where the output is a 100% pure fabrication of human creativity. And essentially the question posed is essentially, can somebody criticize the moral and aesthetic value of the art? And that is tricky because everybody's morals are going to be a bit different. Yeah, that's kind of the trick of it. And with video games, that's no different. While there are certain quantitative values that you can judge in a video game, for example, what resolutions does it run at? What frame rates does it run at? Does it in some of the more we get out into this, the more tricky our quantitative evaluation becomes. Maybe how long does the story take to get through to you, or for you to get through the story? How many items are in the game for you to get? These are hard figures of things that you can quantify. They are actual fixed values. They are factual, empirical values that you can derive, right? Then we get into the qualitative values, right? These are the kind of feelings derived from the game. Did the game feel fair, right? Did it feel like it valued your time, right? These are areas that are a little bit more wishy-washy. They're harder to really pin down because they are not based upon empirical fact. They're based upon your moralism. There are many people that would argue that it is unethical for you to criticize those moral values because, well, I can just like stuff that's different than you, right? You don't like casino fronts because, I don't like the casino front because of the unethical and predatory gambling that's in there, right? And therefore, I have a moral problem with that, right? And you enjoy Battlefront because to you it is what you feel is an authentic recreation of Star Wars battles, and you love the nostalgia that it brings, right? You have a lot of feelings in there. Whose morals are right? My morals against gambling or your morals towards nostalgia? There's no right answer there. However, where I pose it is this. Just because that one of us may have different morals than the other does not mean that a conversation should not happen to begin with, right? Just because you may disagree with my criticism does not mean that I should not make a criticism. I, in fact, should make a criticism so you can disagree with it. Because just like the business putting out the product and people giving feedback to that product in order for it to improve, when I share with you my criticism of something, that's my ideas, that's my morals being outputted there. You therefore disagreeing with it and giving me reasons why you disagree, therefore helps challenge my thought process and helps it so that I can refine my thought process. Was I erroneous? Well, if I was, then I can go back and make an adjustment there. Was I completely right and I need to just find better ways to word stuff so that my points are better articulated? Could be. The fact of the matter is what it all comes back to is a challenge response feedback loop that we need to keep ourselves in and not lose sight of what that means. A lot of people would have you think that critics are completely useless. Some people would have you believe that critics are the final word on something, or a Metacritic, an arbitrary Metacritic score is everything that a game needs. Like what a game gets on Metacritic determines its 100% value. And I think both of those extremes are are in and of themselves inaccurate. I think that critics have their place, but at the same time, they should not be the sole determining factor of your judgment of a product. However, moving on, let's talk about radical autonomism and radical moralism, because we kind of are going to take a little bit of a hyperbolic stance on here, because this is something I think can most easily translate over into the gaming world, right? So there are two extreme positions traditionally taken with respect to the relationship between art and morality. One is autonomism, or I hate this word, aesthetics, whatever. We're not going to get stumbled on that word. That is really, really obnoxious. Screw you, whoever came up with that word. Aestheticism. There we go. Aestheticism. Which is the view that it is inappropriate to apply moral categories to artworks, and that only aesthetic categories are relevant. While at the other end of the scale is moralism, the view that aesthetic objects should be judged wholly or essentially with respect to moral standards or values. Both autonomous and moralism are widely recognized to be problematic, as they are based on inadequate conceptions of art and aesthetic value, as I was just saying. Radical moralism is the view that aesthetic value of an artwork is determined by its moral value. And this is something that is very, very interesting. And this is something that we hear very commonly nowadays. For example, I'll give you a very concrete example, and I'm not going to give my own opinions on this subject. This is just actual criticism that has been said. Overwatch contains it has higher intrinsic aesthetic value to it because it has a very ethnically diverse cast of characters. That, in and of itself, is an example of radical moralism. The diverse, ethnically diverse cast of characters, and I shouldn't just say ethnically, I should say, we'll just say diverse. The diverse cast of characters, therefore equaling to a better aesthetic value or qualitative value, is in and of itself problematic, because the morals that you place on the game should not determine the quality of the game, right? At the same time, the opposite end of the spectrum here, right, where and we're going down to the autonomism here, the label autonomism captures the fact that this position holds that aesthetic value is autonomous from other kinds of value, such as moral value. The label aestheticism captures the I got the word right there. Captures the fact that position emphasis on the importance of focusing on the aesthetic, that is, pure aesthetic features of artwork. Pure aesthetic qualities may be formal features and beauty, or for some autonomous, formal features only. And this is really where we get into video games on here, is whenever you're talking about video games and the creation of video games, right? With in the sense of Overwatch, going back to Overwatch on here, essentially ignoring the diversity of the cast of characters and saying we can't look at the diversity of the characters as a means to judge this game. That would be wrong of us to do. That would be unethical for us to judge the diversity of the cast. That is completely irrelevant to this game. However, the balance of the characters and how they play, the frame rate of how the game plays, how easily it is for me to do what I want to do, how much depth and how much teamwork has to go in for me to win, and so on. These are kind of aesthetic features or formal features, right, that I am saying are the ethical way by which to judge a video game. And that anything moralistic involved in there is not allowed to be judged, right? Those are the kind of two schools of thought from art criticism on here. And like I said, they don't always translate properly because this is taken from a much different form of criticism. And I know you guys have seen the little joke comments about the hoity-toity critic that's essentially oh my, well, this looks like a reminiscent of this and this person from this and this era on this and this format. Then that's not always how art criticism works. But that gives you an idea of kind of how formal and how serious art criticism is taken. And that's the reason why it's a good judgment on there. And how much discussion people have had over art criticism and what should be and should not be allowed. That is really kind of tells you how far it's kind of come and developed, where art criticism is an art unto itself, which is kind of insane. But that's kind of where I leave it off at, is these are kind of what the tools we have, the foundation that we could utilize as a form of ethics in game review and game criticism. There's a lot of open topics on here. There's a lot of realm for interpretation. While I don't think the extremes are there's an answer in the extremes, I do think that there is that middle ground, that gray area is going to vary a lot depending on who you might talk to. Some people might actually say that they do like the diverse cast of characters, and that does play into how they judge the game, whereas others might say that that they don't want to consider the diverse cast. That is not important to them, and that's largely where it plays into, coming back to, is it important to you to say something versus not say something. The really what this boils down to is honesty, right? To be intellectually honest in a review and be fair-minded. If you cannot be fair-minded when making a judgment of something, you are being intellectually dishonest and therefore unethical in your review of a video game. And that's my opinion, of course. There's no formal rules on this, right? So there's no actual hard foundation for us to fall on. But I think that based upon the way that it's handled in other entertainment medium, in other creative works, and other forms of criticism, I think that that's a fair statement to make. That if you are being intellectually dishonest when you review something, that is when it becomes unethical. Okay. However, do let me know what you guys think about it, because that's really it. This is meant to be more of a discussion topic, something to get you thinking, something to kind of get the brain juices going a bit and kind of make you really think about what it is that you see when it comes to critics. Now, I will say that obviously, as I said before, critics aren't evil people necessarily. I'm certain that there are probably dishonest critics out there, and that is its own thing. But this is more meant to be a way for you to view criticism as it's necessarily meant to be, not as not as the final word in whether or not you purchase something, but more as a one voice or one tool of many for you to use as you're making a purchase. On a bit of a side note, in the same vein as criticism on here, I will note that there are many cases, more cases of people deriding criticism for various reasons. As I mentioned before, the whole like, oh, these people are just haters and so on. It is unfortunate that you hear that very frequently, but I would urge you to, if anybody says something along the lines of, just play it for yourself, right? Just play it for yourself. Ignore the haters. That is something that you have to be very wary of, because, well, just play it for yourself may mean that you have to purchase the game, which one of the unfortunate parts of the video game industry is, because it's not very consumer friendly in general. That's a frank fact, is that the video games industry is not consumer friendly. The truth is that if you were to try it for yourself, you may not have an ability to return that. Especially, and this one was the most egregious to me, with Mass Effect Andromeda, was people were like, oh, the game really doesn't open up until like 15 plus hours into the game, right? The arbitrary number there changing depending on who was saying it. The point is that the EA Access 10-hour trial was not enough for you to be able to accurately judge the game. My response to that would be, that is not the fault of the person playing the game. That is the fault of BioWare for not making the game engaging within the first 10 hours. 10 hours is a lot of time to pass within a game for it not to hook you in some way. Like, usually once they get you hooked within the first like hour or less. So 10 hours is pretty insane. But I would still hear that a lot, is that 10 hours is not enough. You have to really buy it and get past that. Well, unfortunately, most people are not going to be able to play 10 hours in one day, maybe even not 10 hours in 1 week. So telling someone that they need to try it themselves and that they have to play more than 10 hours, that means that they cannot return the game at that point. That's assuming that they're buying it on PC, on Origin, where there actually is a return policy. If you're buying it on console, you have no return policy at all. So that's something that any of you out there that might watch this and might think, hey, these people that are criticizing this thing I like are wrong, and in order for you to try to convince others that those critics are wrong, you advise someone to purchase something and find out for themselves if they like it, I would urge you to rethink that. I would urge you to take a step back and say, hey, not everybody has the money to waste on a game that they might not enjoy. Instead, try to give them your best articulated thoughts and opinions, your criticism of the game, both good and bad. Try to think of at least a couple of things you liked and you didn't like about it. And then at the end, give an overall, do I recommend it? Do I not recommend it? That's all. If you recommend the game, just try to find a couple of good things, a couple of bad things. That way you are putting yourself through a intellectually fair process of trying to come up with a fair reason statement on there. It doesn't have to be something crazy, just a little short, just a short little recommendation or not recommendation. And that's one last thing I'll note on here, is that one of the worst parts about reviewing out there, and I really can't wait for the day when it goes away, is the arbitrary numerical rating system is horrible. So my judgment, whenever I see something out of 10 score, is that, 5 is average, right? 7 is above average, and up and up and up. 3 is below average, and 1 is abysmal, right? However, as someone pointed out to me, the reason why a lot of game news outlets judge something as a 7, and 7 is considered to be bad, is kind of based on the kind of school grading system, right? Where 90 or better, a 9 or 10, is an A, quote unquote an A. 80 to 90 is a B, so an 8 out of a 10 or an 8.5 out of 10 is a B, and those are considered good, right? If you get a 70 to 80, that's considered a C, and that's average, right? A D, a 60 or better, is considered poor, and a 50 to 60, so a 5 out of 10, is considered an F, and that's a failing grade. Which to me begs the question, well, not begs the question, that then poses the question, at what point do you need 1 through 4? Why not just start the scale at 5 and then you have 1 through 5? Because you're only using 5 grades, right? That's my thoughts there. Anyway, let's go get things wrapped up on here. So first things first, if you guys are watching this after the fact on YouTube, There will be links down in the description below to my Twitch channel, where you can watch this live if you want. I do this every Wednesday at 7 p.m. Pacific time, and then I post it after the fact on Thursday on my YouTube channel. If you are also interested in chatting with a lot of us Pixel Crashers on here and getting our thoughts on any video games or video game industry, or just want to chat, there's also links to our Discord channel in the link down below, and you'll find a bunch of other links for other stuff such as my my Twitter and YouTube. I don't know. I have links down there for things. I probably don't even remember half of what's down there. I'll be completely honest. I'm really bad at that. I really need to work on that. Anyway, those links are down there and fun stuff. Anyway, we'll be back on Friday at 7 p.m. with another Divinity live stream where I hopefully try to not be as cheap as shit when I'm playing the game and relying on the NPCs to fight my fights for me. No guarantees. Anyway, let's go ahead and take a look at someone to host over here on Twitch and see who's online right now. We have a couple of people on here. It looks like we have a good old size 16s on there still playing some Dragon Age Origins. God, I almost said Divinity Original Sin. Whew, I've been playing that game a lot. Anyway, so we're going to throw a host over at him in just a moment. But obviously, as always, if you're watching this after the fact, feel free to post any questions you might have. I definitely want to hear them, especially on a topic like this, where there is a lot of open interpretation involved. What are your thoughts on the different topics of game criticism and review? Anyway, until next time, guys, we'll be back on Friday, like I said. You guys, stay classy, stay good, have fun, don't work too hard, and remember, you have to be educated and stuff. I wish I had an outro phrase. I should come up with something witty to say at the end, like this is the way the cookie crumbles. Anyway, we'll get out of here, guys. You have a good one. Cheers.
Thank you.